Hey everyone, it's me. Are you ready for some history hot tips? You know what to do. Last week we talked about where did witches get those pointy hats? And while I have your attention, I want to talk about today's topic, which is where did our idea of what a witch looks like come from? Because let's face it, when we think of a witch, we usually think of an old, ugly woman with a big wart on her nose, maybe a goofy hat, and definitely hunched over. But why is she so misshapen? What does that even mean? I mean, there's no mention of witches being warty or deformed in any folklore or mythology. So why are they always depicted like that? Well, here's my take. The witch represents everything men are afraid of and desire to control. And if that sounds kind of heavy for a cartoonish figure who just stirs a cauldron and gives out candy to children, well, that's because it is. But before we get into all that, first, since this is a channel devoted to both fashion and history, we have to talk about the clothing. Usually a witch is shown wearing a dress, but not just any dress. It's a dress that has been ripped apart. See these long trailing sleeves? Those were probably once the sleeves of a long gown, and instead of being attached at the shoulder, they're now dangling from a belt or tied around the waist, leaving those ample expanses of skin between the top and the bottom part of the dress. Now, why is that? Well, exposing the midriff was seen as in fact, during the Middle Ages, women who showed too much skin could be put to death for it. And although the association of sexuality with specific body parts varies across cultures and time periods, the belly button has almost always been considered a sensitive erogenous zone. Just look at all the erotic literature from the Victorian era where the belly button is often described as highly arousing. The point is, back before the days of Instagram models flaunting their navels, showing your midriff was provocative. And so by ripping apart the dress and exposing her midriff, the witch is cast as hypersexual. But that's not all. When we think of a witch, we also think of her pointy shoes. And again, while there's no mention of witches wearing pointed shoes in any early folklore or mythology, they sure do pop up a lot in paintings of witches. Take this one, for example, where you can see the exaggerated length and narrowness of these shoes. Or this one, which shows the buckle that holds the shoe together in the middle of the foot. These paintings are from the late 18th century, and well over a decade before the publication of The Wizard of Oz. The pointy shoe was invented at least 130 years ago, and had nothing to do with Dorothy's beloved slippers. But why? Well, pointed shoes are sexy. No matter how many times people try to convince themselves otherwise, pointy shoes are inherently sexual. And yes, I know that pointy shoes were also a symbol of wealth and power, but let's be honest, the only reason they became a symbol of wealth and power is because royalty liked to pair them with corsets and stockings and basically use them as a way to show off their lingerie. So you may think that pointy shoes are a thing of beauty, but don't try to lie to yourself. They're inherently sexual, and by putting a pair of stilettos on her feet, the artist is making it clear what exactly the witch is all about. So now we've got a dress that exposes her midriff and shoes that make it clear she is super sexual. But what about the rest of her? Why does she have a big wart on her nose, and why is she hunched over? Well, to answer those questions, we have to go back in time to the origins of the word witch. Today we associate the word witch with anything related to Satanism and the occult. But did you know that before the 15th century, the word witch didn't carry any of that baggage? In fact, the word simply meant a woman who was in the process of giving birth. Yep. A witch was just another term for a midwife. But how did the nice folks of the 15th century decide that witches should be associated with the devil? Well, the answer is pretty simple. To understand the modern conception of the witch, you have to understand the demonization of female sexuality. Back in the olden times, most people didn't have access to birth control, meaning that sex could very easily result in pregnancy. Now, obviously, the concept of sex before marriage was taboo, and so anyone who got pregnant needed to be able to prove that she had lost her virginity through means other than marriage, lest she scandalize her entire community. And so what better way to prove that you didn't sleep around than by blaming it on a witch? That's right. Back in the olden times, you could sue a woman for witchcraft and win your case simply by saying that she cursed you with pregnancy. And that's precisely what happened during the Salem witch trials. Most of the women who were accused of being a witch were elderly women who lived alone. In fact, they even developed a phrase for them, a lone woman, which meant that she was a witch. But why would they single out older women for these accusations? Well, it's pretty simple. Older women were seen as sexual threats. Even though most men would never admit to sleeping with an older woman, the fact that they were seen as sexually active made them uncomfortable, and so young men, especially those whose fathers had just won them a bride, would accuse these independent older women of being a threat. After all, if they were truly in league with the devil, then he would protect them from any harm, meaning that they could continue to freely prey upon the young boys of the community. Of course, we now know that that isn't true, that older women aren't protected by the devil, but back then, people weren't so sure, and so the belief that older women were sexual predators continued to persist, and as such, they were easy targets for men looking to unload their own sexual frustrations. And that brings us back to the imagery we've used to represent the witch for centuries. Ever wonder why we call an older woman a hag instead of something more neutral like senior citizen? It's because the word hag has extremely negative connotations. It comes from an Old English word that means ill omen or bad, But why do we have these harsh connotations? Why is a woman who has lived a full life seen as a bad omen? Well, the answer is simple. Men needed a boogeyman to scare young girls away from engaging in premarital sex. And what better boogeyman than an old, ugly, grotesque woman who was constantly trying to seduce young men for her own gratification? The same goes for the depiction of the witch as hunched over. If you've ever seen an old person walk before, you know that they often have a distinct hunch to their back. In fact, it's one of the main telltale signs of getting old. And so, by depicting the witch as hunched over, we're depicting her as an old woman. And by depicting her as old, we're saying she's a sexual threat. It's the same exact logic behind telling children that if they stay out past dusk, the boogeyman will get them. The boogeyman is simply a manifestation of their deepest fears. And for men, their deepest fear is a woman who enjoys sex. The irony is that in many ways, the witch represents the ultimate female fantasy, a woman who is desired for her own gratification, and not because she needs to lure unsuspecting young men into her bed. But unfortunately, that's not how it's perceived. Instead, she's viewed as a monster, something to be feared and ostracized, someone who needs to be killed, someone who must be silenced. And of course, I know this video is about the stereotypical witch, the one we see in Halloween costumes, but the same logic applies to real witches as well. For centuries, male society has tried to repress female sexuality, and those who dared to explore their own desires were labeled witches. They were persecuted and murdered, and the legacy of that continues to this day. Every time a woman is slut-shamed or harassed for having sex, we are perpetuating the myth that female sexuality is dangerous. We are keeping the fires of the witch hunt alive. But I want to end this video on a hopeful note. More and more, people are rejecting this antiquated thinking. Society is slowly shifting away from victim blaming, and hopefully, sooner than later, the stereotype of the witch will change as well. She'll stop being this monstrous creature and become a symbol of female empowerment. So there you have it, my dears. That's where our idea of what a witch looks like really came from. I hope you learned something new today, and if you did, remember to show your support. It really helps me out. I'd also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to my patrons who make videos like this possible. And with that, I bid you